Now, ordinarily, Doug is the guy who just doesn't bonk. At this moment, though, Elvis himself was riding on Doug's handlebars. Doug croaked out as best as he could. "Looking good, Nelson." I gasped, "You too, Doug." Elvis mumbled, "Thank you very much," and had another donut.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, a podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race. Hadi, here along with Fatty, bringing you the show that answers your questions, gives you training tips, details the course, and tells the stories about the highest and hardest one-day mountain bike race in America, the Leadville Trail 100 mountain bike race. This episode is presented by The Feed. One of the most important parts of having a great Leadville 100 is training the way you plan to race, and that's definitely true with your nutrition. TheFeed.com is a great way to get and train with whatever you're going to eat on race day. The Feed has an incredible variety, great recommendations, and training advice from their staff. They have fast shipping and great pricing. Fatty swears by The Feed, using them to get his supply of pre-ride bonk breaker bars, Goo Roctane gels, and Martin's race drink mix. But whether you choose to follow Fatty's lead for your nutrition or have your own food strategy, chances are you can find what you need at The Feed. Check them out at thefeed.com. If you subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, and we hope you will, you'll notice that along with our weekly Season 1 show, we are releasing a half dozen Season 0 shows, binge style, all at once here. Unlike our regular shows, these Season 0 shows are one-topic Leadville race stories. They're Fatty recounting some of his favorite races out of the 21 times he has started the Leadville Trail 100. Listen to one when you need a little inspiration, that's what I do, or listen to all of them at once when you're on a long ride. The first episode is from way back in 1997 when the event was capped at 400 people, 1/5 as many as today, and all you needed to do to get in was mail in your registration. Here's Fatty with his first Leadville 100.
Nothing has ever got into my head like the Leadville 100. From the moment I signed on in January 1997 until the day of the race in August 9th, I thought about that race every day. Now that it's over, I still think about it. As early as April, I had written an exhaustive checklist of everything I needed to bring to the race, along with what would go in each drop bag. I bought a new pair of extra nice biking shorts. The nicer the chamois, the fewer the saddle sores. I bought a wool jersey, figuring that the race day would be cold. I experimented with every exercise drink and bar known to humankind. My most extravagant race purchase, however, was probably my bike. Right after signing up for the race, I ordered an ibis bow tie. Though I didn't tell anybody until now, the main reason I wanted an ultra-expensive, radically designed, hardtail light, titanium full suspension bike was that I thought it would be a cool ride on the Leadville 100. I wasn't the only one obsessing about this race, though. The other guys I knew who had signed up for this race also couldn't get the thing out of their minds. We'd call each other and discuss every possible aspect of the race, from what we planned to wear, to what we were going to eat and drink, to how many tubes we were going to carry, to what tire pressure we were going to run, to whether we'd ride together for moral support, and under what circumstances it was acceptable to peel away. We all had the race map and elevation chart pinned up where we could see them often. When we rode our bikes, we all imagined ourselves on the Leadville 100. Basically, for me, waiting for the Leadville 100 was like when I was a kid, unable to sleep on Christmas Eve. Except in this case, Christmas Eve lasts 8 months, and when Santa comes down the chimney, instead of giving you presents, he makes you ride your bike 100 miles, there and back trail, on Jeep roads around the tiny town of Leadville, Colorado, in 12 hours or less, at an altitude ranging from 9,000 to 12,600 feet, with a total vertical climb of around 11,000 feet. If you finish in less than 9 hours, Santa gives you a gold rodeo-style belt buckle. If you finish in less than 12 hours, you get a silver belt buckle. If you don't finish within 12 hours, you don't get squat. And of course, Santa charges you $160 for the privilege of riding it all. On August 7th, Doug, Brad, and I piled all our gear and ourselves into my Honda Civic, met my brother-in-law Rocky in Grand Junction, and drove over to Leadville, Colorado. We did a quick preview ride of what is regarded as the toughest climb in the course, more on that later, then went to bed. I was so excited / nervous I couldn't sleep. The next day, the day before the race, we went to what seems like a dozen pre-race meetings where they gave us our race numbers and slapped medical wrist tags on us. We spent the balance of the day wandering around town, looking for other people with medical wrist tags strapped on, knowing that everyone in one of those bracelets was thinking about one thing only. Knowing the race started at 6 a.m. the next morning, we laid out all our stuff before we went to bed. I couldn't sleep. We got up early, 4:30 a.m., so we'd have time to eat and digest a little bit. The good folks at the Delaware Hotel had been thoughtful enough to set out a breakfast for the racers. It took a force of will to choke down a bowl of cornflakes. I was that nervous. We got our bikes out and walked over to the starting line. Gathering around were 400 bikes and riders crammed together in the darkness. We were all stamping, jumping, shivering, stammering, both from the cold and from nerves. Doug and Brad moved up toward the front of the line. Rocky and I, considerably slower riders, purposely went to the very, very back, so we wouldn't hold up real contenders. At 6 a.m. sharp, the gun went off. Probably a minute later, the back of the line, where I was, started to move. The first 6 miles of the race go by fast. They're on smooth paved downhill. I was going as fast as 30 miles per hour. Those in front probably were going closer to 40. As packed as we were, those of us in the back didn't need to pedal at all. We were riding our brakes. We were all cold. Then we peeled off onto the dirt and pedaled along for a short way before the first climb, St. Kevin's. St. Kevin's is a steep, sandy, 5-mile uphill, but not at all technical. There's very little technical riding in this course. Within a couple 100 yards, I got into a good pedaling rhythm, was warmed up, and all my nervousness disappeared. Vanity alert. I am about to brag. A quarter of a mile into St. Kevin's, I started regretting starting so far back in the pack. A narrow road was jammed with slower riders, slowing me down. I passed dozens of people with perfect, ripped bodies. They looked like they belonged in beer commercials, but there they were, suffering. Some of them were pushing their bikes already. In my mind, I pictured vultures circling over them. And I with my little spare tire, am passing them easily. I guess it was a good idea to spend the summer concentrating on climbing long distances. Somewhere on the climb, I lost Rocky. I didn't know whether he was ahead of me or behind me, and I didn't care. I felt great. After that grunt up St. Kevin's, we were rewarded with a descent down the other side on hyper-smooth pavement. At least it seemed hyper-smooth at the time. Those of us who didn't know the trail, and that therefore we'd have such an easy descent, nearly cried tears of gratitude. I buzzed down, hitting 45 miles per hour. I could have easily gone faster, but didn't see the point. With around 90 miles left to go, why risk the road rash from hell? Besides, it was just nice to coast for a few minutes. At the bottom of St. Kevin's, the course takes an abrupt right back onto dirt road, and the only single track in the entire race. It was beautiful single track, too. Packed soft earth, wooded, rooty, interesting technically, challenging but not impossible. And I didn't get to ride even an inch of it. See, when you've got 400 people trying to thread a short stretch of single track 15 miles into a 100-mile race, you've got a serious bottleneck situation. As soon as one guy dabs, everything stops. So, with someone a foot ahead of me and someone else a foot behind me, I marched. Since there was nothing we could do about it, most everyone was very cool about the slowdown and took the time to talk and get to know their neighbor. While we're talking, someone says, "Wasn't that huge paved downhill great?" I'm about to agree when it hits me. That huge paved downhill we just enjoyed 10 miles into the race meant we were going to have to endure a huge paved uphill 80-something miles into the race. I said as much out loud, and everything got real quiet. Maybe a couple of us started to cry. In any case, I wished I had taken a look at my computer at the beginning and end of the downhill. I had a feeling that knowing that distance would be important to me later. Half a mile later, we came out of the single track onto Fire Road. Time to do Sugarloaf. I don't much remember climbing Sugarloaf on the way in. It's just a sort of steep grunt, mostly notable because traffic had thinned out enough that you could pass without problem. The drop down the other side, though, was a blast. It's super steep, sandy, and rutted with rocks and turns all over the place. I had had my bow tie for exactly a week. Ibis had taken 8 months to deliver the bike, and this was the first time I had a chance to really see what full suspension is like. Now, downhill has never been my strong suit, so this bike made a huge difference. I bombed down, passing people left and right. Oops, forgot to warn you about the bragging this time. On the way down, I noticed 4 or 5 people working on pinch flats, and I was glad I had pumped my tires all the way up to 50 psi. Sugarloaf dumps you out at the fish hatchery, the 25-mile mark, and the first support station. It was 8:05, meaning I had taken 2 hours and 5 minutes to get there. I was a little ahead of my goal to finish in 10.5 hours. I still had plenty of food, and my Camelback, filled with half-strength Cytomax, wasn't even close to empty. No need to stop. I rode through the station, a huge crowd of people cheering me on. Okay, the fact is, this crowd of people cheered every rider on, but it didn't matter to me. Throughout the race, anytime I came across volunteers or onlookers at this race, their encouragement gave me a huge morale boost. And when you're riding 100 miles on the dirt, that boost makes a difference. It's only 15 miles from the fish hatchery to the Twin Lakes Dam, the next support station. This section is as close to flat as the course ever gets. Although you're never, rarely, on level ground, none of the hills are very steep nor very long. A few miles into this section, though, my right knee started to hurt. I figured my seat post was too low. Remember, this bike was new to me, and adjusted it up about 1/8 of an inch. It didn't help. What did help, though, was talking to other riders. You would think that during a 100-mile race, people would get pretty spread out. I think, though, that there were only a couple of short stretches along the entire race when I couldn't see another rider, either in front of or behind me. As I or they would pass, we would often make a point of matching speed for a minute or two and talking. It was chatter, by and large. Most of us were too out of breath to have involved conversations. Mostly we just congratulate each other on having made it this far, tell each other how good we were looking, and encourage each other to stick it out. Still, during the monotony of this stretch of trail and the increasing pain of my right knee, any distraction was welcome. My stats show that I pulled into the Twin Lakes Dam aid station at 9:15. I had done the first 40 miles of the race in 3 hours, 15 minutes. I was on track with my goals, which I had written on a piece of tape and stuck to my handlebar. In fact, I was a little ahead. I felt unstoppable. I refilled my Camelback to about halfway, knowing that one of the toughest climbs of the race of my life was about to begin, and I didn't want to have any more weight than was necessary. Thanks to the incredibly helpful and supportive volunteers, I can't say enough nice things about them, I was back on my bike in about 3 minutes. A quick, rolling 2-mile section brought me to the base of Columbine Mine. I had alternately fantasized about and dreaded this stretch of the race for months. Take a quick look at the race elevation chart, and I think you'll see why. In about 8 months, you climb more than 3,400 feet to an elevation of 12,600. Oh, hell. With that said, though, the first 5 miles of this climb is surprisingly easy. It's a well-groomed, wide dirt road. I shifted into my middle ring, granny, and started to churn. I, like everyone else, hugged the right side of the road, knowing that it wouldn't be long before the real contenders would come blasting down the other side of the road. Sure enough, about 9:50, by which time I had shifted to something considerably easier than my middle granny, I saw Mike Volk, who would eventually win, come bombing down. Soon, others poured down and I started hating them. It's just not fair, I thought. They get to ride down this damn hill while I ride up. The least they could do is show a little sympathy, maybe get off and walk their bikes down. I may not have been completely rational at the time. After 5 miles, the nice groomed road suddenly ends, and I had the remaining 3 or so miles to look forward to. Except I didn't look forward to them at all. As far as I could see, people were lined up, slowly walking their bikes up a steep, rocky, rutted, sandy double track that often turned into single track in a rarefied air. The only thing we needed to make the agony complete was pit bulls nipping at our ankles. Pansies, I thought. You see, earlier in the year, Rocky and I had ridden up this stretch of the climb, just to see what it was like, and we hadn't had to walk much of it at all. So, staying on my bike, I spun right by the dozens of people, climbing like a mountain goat on crack. At least that's what I had planned on doing. The reality is, as soon as I hit a steep section, I realized I didn't have any juice in my legs. I guess there's a difference in riding a section by itself and riding it after you've already turned in 40 plus miles that morning. I got off my bike and joined the march. In my head, this became the longest, most agonizing stretch of the race. Although there were lots of people, both ahead and behind me, none of us had any energy or breath for conversation. We were all just concentrating on climbing this mountain, our bikes sometimes rolling, sometimes on our shoulders, our stupid biking shoes slipping on the rocks. As riders who had reached the summit came rocketing down, we'd step aside and they'd shout words of encouragement. "Looking good. You're almost there." One of those guys coming down the trail was my friend Brad. I don't think he saw me until I called out his name. He looked pretty beat. A minute or two later, my friend Doug came by. Now, ordinarily, Doug is the guy who just doesn't bonk. At this moment, though, Elvis himself was riding on Doug's handlebars. Doug croaked out as best as he could, "Looking good, Nelson." I gasped, "You too, Doug." Elvis mumbled, "Thank you very much," and had another donut. Finally, the track leveled off enough that I could climb back onto my bike, and I rode the final mile of the aid station. I had hit the halfway point. It was 11:22. I was about 5 minutes slower than my goal. At this point, though, I was just happy to stop. I rested for a few minutes, during which I stuffed a bunch of cookies and M&Ms into my mouth, a fistful of free power gels into my jersey pocket, and snarfed a couple of hard body bars. More than anything else, though, I relished the thought of the exquisite 8-mile-long downhill in front of me. Riding down the Columbine Mine was just the break I needed. I coasted down, relaxing, drinking lots of watered-down Cytomax, good-naturedly hollering, "Looking good," and "You're almost there," at the poor folks limping up the hill. If you're doing the math, you might have noticed it took me 2:07 to make it from Twin Lakes Dam aid station to the Columbine Mine turnaround point. The return trip took 31 minutes. Having had a huge on-bike rest, I didn't stop at the Twin Lakes Dam. Right about at the dam, however, I hooked up with a couple of other guys and we paced each other for the next 10 miles or so. One of these guys had clearly taken a bad spill. His shorts were torn up, and one of his thighs was a bloody rash. He said that as he rode through the fish hatchery aid station 25 miles into the race, a child had bolted out in front of him. He had dropped his bike and slid on the pavement to miss the kid. This guy, I wish I remembered his name, picked up his bike and kept going, knowing he'd have to do the remaining 75 miles with a nasty road rash. He gets my nomination for the Never Say Die award. I, on the other hand, was giving myself the nomination for the I Wish I Was Dead award. Somewhere between the Twin Lakes Dam and the fish hatchery, my knees started hurting much worse. My nipples were bleeding. The wool jersey was apparently not such a great idea. It was also during this section that my calves started taking turns cramping. I discovered, however, that by stretching each calf at the end of each downstroke, I could avoid going into a full-on debilitating cramp. I would ride for the rest of the race, about 35 miles, with my right knee hurting like hell and both calves on the cusp of a cramp. To add to this, I found I could no longer eat normal food. I was breathing too hard and the air was too thin to breathe through my nose, so chewing food meant holding my breath. Plus, my mouth was so dry. Hard body bars tasted like particle board, chocolate-coated particle board, but particle board nevertheless. I knew that without some kind of food, I was headed for a serious bonk. So I decided as I approached the fish hatchery that from that aid station forward, I would suck down a power gel every 30 minutes. Toward the end of the race, I would change that to 20 minutes. That did the job. For the rest of the race, I didn't feel like I was about to bonk, though since then I haven't been able to think about vanilla power gels, the only kind left at the aid station, without triggering my gag reflex. I rolled through the fish hatchery aid station at 1:36, 7.5 hours into the race. Though I didn't know it at the time, Mike Volk had just won the race more than half an hour ago. I, on the other hand, was about to start what is widely known as the hardest 25 miles of the course. Imagine, you've just ridden a very hard 75 miles and now have to climb Sugarloaf Mountain, an extremely sandy, steep 5-mile hill. Then you have to climb St. Kevin's, the long, steep, paved section we had all hiked, coasting down forever ago. Or you can quit and pedal along a flat, short, paved road back into town. No wonder so many people bail out of the race at the fish hatchery. Apart from my knee and calves, though, I felt good. Climbing up the Sugarloaf Mountain, I even started feeling giddy, elated. I had this addle-brained epiphany and blurted out to another rider struggling up the hill, "Hey man, we're going to make it. You and I are going to finish this race. Even if we sat down and took a nap right now, we'd still have enough time to finish this race before the cutoff time. We are unstoppable." At the time, I meant each and every one of those exclamation points. I rode on in my granny gear, feeling a strange mixture of incredible pain and excitement. The top of Sugarloaf Mountain led to a bumpy, fast downhill. Once again, I was in love with my bow tie. Then a quick jaunt through the short single track. This time there wasn't the bottleneck, and I was able to ride it. Sweet. The single track dumped me onto what I thought was the final big climb of the course, the paved St. Kevin's section. Because I hadn't checked my computer on the way down, I couldn't remember how long this stretch was, and it seemed to go on forever. Finally, though, I got back onto dirt. A quick drop down on the other side of St. Kevin's brought me to the light at the end of the tunnel. Just 6 more miles to go. I didn't understand, though, that the final 6 miles don't go along the same road as the first 6 miles. Instead, we were rerouted onto an uphill dirt road known as the Boulevard. This road has false summit after false summit, very demoralizing. Then the wind started to blow. Then it started to rain. Another racer hunkered down behind me, using me as a wind block. When we got to the top of the hill, he pulled ahead and rode away. Somehow I knew I had to find a way to catch this guy. But I didn't have anything left. Or at least I thought I didn't. During the final mile, I recuperated a little so that I was able to regain a little ground on the guy. And for the last 100 yards, mostly downhill, thankfully, I managed to stand up and sprint. Giving it everything I had, I passed this guy at the finish line, beating him by 1 second. A race official put the medal around my neck. Everyone who finishes gets one. And Doug and Brad helped me off my bike. I had finished the race in 10 hours, 36 minutes, just 6 minutes off my goal. I felt like jumping up and down, but had to settle for proudly collapsing in a heap. Brad and Doug finished the race in 9 hours and 44 minutes and 9 hours 45 minutes, respectively. Rocky got seriously dehydrated, and they pulled him off the course against his will at the 75-mile mark. They toted him off in an ambulance, filled him up with glucose, and released him later that afternoon. Meanwhile, Doug, Brad, and I kept up our vigil for him at the finish line, totally clueless as to what was happening to Rocky. That night, my right knee swelled up, and I kept waking up hungry. We all still talk about the race. The 1998 Leadville 100 registration filled up in less than 2 days. I managed to register I managed to register in time, so August 15th, I'm doing it again. And again, I can't stop thinking about it.
That's it for this episode in Season 0, Episode 2, 1 year, 3 friends, 3 very different stories, and 1 finish. If you haven't yet subscribed, please head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts and do so. And be sure to leave us a 5-star rating and a review. In the early days of a podcast, you doing that makes an enormous difference in whether other Leadville 100 racers and hopefuls can find us. If you've got comments on the show, we'd love to hear them. Tweet us at hashtag Leadville100podcast or head on over to Leadville100podcast.com and leave us a note there. For Fatty, I'm Hadi. Be sure to check back on Tuesdays for our regular show. Train well, race hard, and we'll see you at the finish line this August.